Extract from the book Child of the Eagle by John Vincent Clarke and narrated by Dennis Clarke. He will read the first portion of chapter 16, The Lions of Umfolozi. The strands of my life are wonderfully woven into a multicolored cloth by the master weaver. My past life is now a source of amazement to me. Continually, some experience out of the past ties up with the present happening. As a schoolboy, one of my Afrikaans set books was Drie Jong Jagters by P.J. Schoeman, 3 Young Hunters. So it was that long before I ever set foot on the reserve, I knew something of the Umfolozi countryside. I had been introduced to the area by a masterful writing of a gentleman who had spent some of his childhood on the flats of Nkabeni, Hill of Refusal. Nkeba, like a scab on a wound, that's what it means. Ndlovu Yashigana, meaning the elephant shook his head as a warning. And Siembeni, meaning 2 rivers join. Places so well described that years later I would feel as if I had walked there before. I looked hard and long before I obtained a copy of that book. He describes a lion hunt, and reading the book again as I sit here writing, I can place the action at the base of the Matamslopi Hill, White Rocks, in the Gideoni Valley. This hill features a lot of my memories of Umfolozi, and I have often heard Blondie calling from this peak. Now my permanent camp, built African style, graced the area between the Umfolozi River and the Matamslopi Hill. My cook shack, just poles, roofed over with local thatch, had only enough woven sticks as half walls tend to break the wind. One evening Blondie was particularly loud, and I was surprised to see a full-grown waterbuck come and stand in the space between my hut and the cook shack. He stood there for at least 10 minutes, before melting again into the night. After only a few months of being initiated into the art of hunting by my game guards, I found myself alone on top of Mqoloti, stalking a small troop of zebra. I had followed this family for a week or so, all the way from the Black Umfolozi River. They were very skitsy, as they were obviously venturing into strange territory. I was applying all my newly developed skills, coming from downwind, making use of small shrubby bushes and leopard crawling slowly, and stopping frequently when the zebras were looking around. I stood up very disappointed when the zebra hurtled off into the distance, yodeling in zebra fashion as they vanished. A low, rumbling growl to my right alerted me to the presence of Blondie, the name I had given to the only male lion on Umfolozi. He was less than 30 meters to my right, and we were both stalking the same zebra. Can you put yourself into my boots? Well, I was still to reach the stage where I could walk or run around barefoot. I had a loaded Lee Enfield .303 rifle in my hands, all cocked and ready to fire. But then the thought flashed through my mind. John, do you really want to go down in the annals of the reserve's history as the first person to see and shoot the only lion to re-establish itself on the reserve? All the rangers were praying that a lioness should walk the same route that Blondie had walked the year before. I also knew that members of the board wanted to issue orders to do just what I now was in a position to do, to get rid of the lion. This was one of the few times I regretted my habit of walking around alone. No one to witness with me the sort of experience I have now recorded. It felt like an eternity before the lion, still grumbling at the inaptitude of the stupid ranger that had spoilt his hunting, turned away and without a backward glance walked off towards Ndlovu Yashigana. I then realized that I had been holding my breath. It was a beautiful moment, the first time I ever encountered a wild lion in his home territory. I can still recall the heart-thumping, adrenaline-filled, thrilling experience, all mixed with not just a little nervousness. By the way, the name Ndlovu Shigana is translated as the elephant that shakes its head. It does this to intimidate you before a mock charge. Just as well, Blondie did not prescribe to the elephant's habits. The zebras were forgotten as I pulled out my pipe and I cleaned it, refilled and lit it up. This to steady my nerves. This moment called for a fresh pipeful. Sitting on an anthill and smoking, I relived the whole episode over and over again in my mind. The bush cover was not more than knee-height, so a lot of him appeared when he stood up from his stalking position. He was in magnificent condition, without not a single fighting scar to be seen. I pondered on what would have the scene been like if this had been a pride of, say, 6 lions. Now you must understand my feelings when, on relating these to Nick and Ian, I was told I had made up the story, and they would not believe me. At this point I must tell you that Blondie was not yet an adult. His black mane was evident, but sort of mid-length and scruffy, not extended too far into his back, or down his shoulders, as was seen a few years later. At this point they believed the lion was full-grown, and here I come in and tell them that he was still too mature. A couple of years later I met the ranger in charge of Mkuzi, Singi Denyer, and he told me the history of how Blondie had arrived at Umfolozi. The Pride of Lions used to visit Mkuzi quite regularly. Their patrol route was the Tongaland Flats to the north of Mkuzi. One day, when investigating a Willoughby's kill, there were signs of a fight. It was presumed to be between 2 males. Anyway, the loser left the scene at a gallop, heading southwards towards the Duku Duku forest, just north of St. Lucia. It was not very long before the whole of Zululand turned out with an army of guns to try to bag him. My guard, Ndebezikwayo, informed me one night as we sat around the fire that he knew the old man who, during this period, cleaned up at the post office at Matubatuba. This old gentleman was insistent that he saw the lion early one morning, calmly strolling down the main street of Matubatuba. This old gentleman used to arrive for work very early in the morning, and he used to catch a lift from a taxi driver into town. The driver then carried on to Kwambonambi, quite a few kilometers further on towards Impangeni. In other words, this is why, according to him, he got into town very early. He claimed that this story was verified when, in the evening of the same day, he had seen the lion in Matubatuba. A black lady friend of his was walking along a path on the banks of the Umfolozi River. The path was in a tall, thick reed bed, and she met the lion coming around a sharp bend and towards her on the same path. She was carrying a very large clay pot full of African homemade beer, Zulu style, on her head. When she stopped suddenly, the beer spilled all over the startled lion. He was that close to her. When she recovered from falling down in a faint, she reversed direction and rapidly left the scene. She left a broken clay pot behind. It seems as if the lion took off at high speed in the opposite direction, did not stop until he reached the Umfolozi Game Reserve. I wonder what he thought of the taste of beer when he licked himself clean. But I suppose the beer washed off when he crossed the Umfolozi River. The river was deeper then and did not have the large amount of sand that the cyclone Des Moines had brought down. It was in 1958 when the guards first recorded his tracks in the sand on the riverbed of the White Umfolozi. They had to cover the tracks with branches and take Ian and Nick there before they were proven to be able to tell the difference between lion and leopard tracks. Camping as I did and travelling light, we moved camp regularly and did not need to make a special campsite. Also, this meant we also used to experience some interesting encounters. One such was when I set up camp at the base of Nkabaneni Hill. The Ngana campaign had used this site as a central camp during the period of major shootout of game. At first, all the animals shot were skinned, and the skins stored in a large heap at Nkabaneni. But in time, hide beetles got in and wrecked the skins. To cover their embarrassing mistake, this mountain of skins was set on fire. According to my gun guard, Nkomo Mvubu, the heap burned for days and the smell carried for miles. Anyway, as it was still devoid of cover, it seemed to be a good practice to camp. The river being only a short walk away added to the points in this favour. The first night in the new campsite can bring a few surprises. You might be sleeping on a rhino's favourite path to water, or what happened one evening when I was wakened by the huffing and puffing of two rhino disputing the right-of-way around my tent. The next morning we found tracks of these two combatants as close as 2 meters from my tent. I can only conclude that they treated the tent as a large rock. Yet with their excellent sense of smell, I presume they chose to ignore me. To return to the Nkabaneni camp, 2 or 3 nights later, I woke up knowing something was amiss. But it took me a few minutes to realize that the tent was vibrating to the grunting of Blondie. Even the matches in the box on the ground next to my paraffin lamp were rattling. The guards reacted much quicker than I did, and the fire restarted fast. They must have used paraffin. The midnight concert abruptly ended, and a half an hour later he let us know that he had moved away by an encore of his Serenade of the Bushveld, Opus 2. Opus 1 was too close for comfort. Again, examination of the campsite the next morning revealed that Blondie had come within 10 or so paces of my tent, detoured around and only made his presence known a good 20 paces beyond the camp. His tracks were plainly visible in the dusty, ashy soil. He had definitely come to investigate who was camping in his territory. His non-belligerent attitude was also related to Nick by one of the game guards. This story was told to me by Nick. The game guard arrived at the Gami outpost one evening late to report on a poaching incident. On being questioned as to why he was so agitated, the guard told the story of his encounter with Blondie. There was a heavy reed bed called Slanganeni between the guard camp and Gome. As the road went right through the centre of the reed bed, he was obliged to walk in the darkness through the tunnel created by the reeds. He was naturally very cautious, as this reed bed was known to harbour black rhino, an animal one kept away even in broad daylight. On exiting and starting the climb out of the riverbed, he became aware of something in the darkness ahead. He knelt down and saw silhouetted against the sky what appeared to be a donkey with a long tail. Now this tail ended in a large bushy brush. When he clicked that it was Blondie, he died, his explanation of him fainting. Nick did not want to believe the story, but once again the tracks in the river sand were startling, to say the least. Plainly visible were the marks where the guard had fallen onto the roadway, as equally plain were the tracks where the lion had detoured around the guard. His tracks were in the next door wheel track, and had walked right on, right past the recumbent guard. When you understand that the road was made by a Land Rover with its narrow wheelbase, will you appreciate how close the lion came to the unconscious game guard. What a story to tell his grandchildren. I wonder if they ever believed him.